Ready.
You're good.
Okay. So, this is an unprecedented visit.
Is it?
Well, we've never seen the Secretary of State come through here at election time, so
Yeah.
what's the purpose of your visits?
So I ran elections in one of Pennsylvania's counties, in Philadelphia County, for 10 years. And I want to make sure that, what we do at the Pennsylvania Department of State is informed by the experiences of all counties. So Lawrence County is my 52nd county visit. Traveling around, spending an hour or two with county election directors and with their commissioners, if they're available, to hear feedback from them about how the Pennsylvania Department of State can be supportive of their efforts. Elections in Pennsylvania are really run at the county level. Department of State has an important oversight responsibility. We have an important support role, but really, voters are casting their votes and having them counted is at the county level. So that's why I'm taking a little bit of time to visit with them directly and to hear from them directly.
What kind of feedback did you get from Lawrence County's election officials?
Well, elections are run very well in Lawrence County. So sometimes when I travel around, I have a lot of other people from our department with me because there are issues for all of us to work through, but that's not the case with Lawrence County. So that's why I'm here visiting solo today.
Were there any issues to work through?
They provided some feedback, which is very helpful and consistent with some other counties. The issues that we discussed, and I would rather not talk about what specifically we talked about, but the issues that they raised are all issues that we've addressed since in the past year or so, and was consistent with my experience running elections in Philadelphia. I'm from Western Pennsylvania originally.
Where are you from?
I grew up in Allegheny County and went to college I went to college up at Allegheny College in Crawford County.
In Meadville?
In Meadville. So I spent the first 20 years of my life in Western Pennsylvania and the last 20 in Philadelphia and now Harrisburg.
So, how long have you been Secretary of State?
I was appointed by Governor Shapiro in January of 2023 and then confirmed in June of 2023.
Okay, so this is the second general election you'll be going through.
That's right. At least at the Department of State.
You didn't come through last year though. Why this year?
I waited until I was confirmed
Okay.
to begin doing the county visits. It would seem presumptuous to begin county visits before being confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started a little more than a year ago, and just have been sort of working my way through. So I have Lawrence this morning, and then have Mercer this afternoon, and then Beaver tomorrow, and that will be almost all of Western Pennsylvania I will have visited. There's some in the northern tier that are sort of northwest, like Elk and some others up that way, and I still have to visit those, and we'll get to those in the next couple weeks.
So how does Lawrence County rank among the ones you visited as far as its election process?
Well, counties really run, have a lot of authority for how to run elections, and they can do it within the confines of the Pennsylvania Election Code. So some counties offer drop boxes, some counties don't. Some counties offer, if a mail-in ballot comes back and the voter forgets to sign it or date it or puts their birthday, they'll reach out to the voter and say, your ballot was returned without it being signed. Some counties allow the voter to come by the office to sign it. Other counties allow the voter to cancel that ballot and request a new one. So there's a lot of variation
But
in
those could
Pennsylvania.
change with these lawsuits, correct?
Yes, and while you can't predict turnout and you can't predict who's going to win or lose, you can always predict that there's going to be plenty of lawsuits around election time, especially presidential election time.
Okay.
So there's been no shortage of that for sure. But, well, no one wants to be involved in litigation. The courts really are where our disputes should be settled. And that's why, in the absence of legislation resolving questions that people have about Act 77 and mail-in ballot voting in particular, those issues get resolved in the courts instead of the legislature, which is obviously the more preferable place for those things to be handled. But since 2020, we really haven't seen any election reform legislation pass. We're unique, I believe, in the country with a divided legislature, with a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. So the House has passed bills that include things the Senate is not comfortable with. The Senate has passed things the House is not uncomfortable with, even if 90% of both are things everyone agrees on, that are technical solutions to technical problems that will make voting better for voters and easier on the people responsible for running elections.
So you seem to have visited a lot of counties so far. How do you think Pennsylvania looks compared to other states in the election?
Yeah, a lot of states, you know, I mentioned how elections are really run at the county level in Pennsylvania. It's the same thing nationwide, right? Elections in Georgia are just so much different than Pennsylvania, or elections in Michigan or others. But the key, like what are usually described as the battleground states, have a lot in common, whether it's Arizona or Georgia or Pennsylvania or Michigan, in terms of all that litigation, in terms of how at times contentious election administration can be. I came into office, I was elected in Philadelphia. The city commissioners in Philadelphia are elected. We have 3 city commissioners. For the past 60 years, it's been 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. Another Republican was the Republican city commissioner for Philadelphia. Each county has like a different structure. So most have 3 commissioners with a board of elections. Others have a county executive or a separate board of elections, or sort of all the rest. But since coming in 2012, 2020 and since, the atmosphere certainly changed a lot since 2020, running elections. Normally campaigns compete against other campaigns and candidates run against other candidates, and unfortunately it's become more common that the people responsible for running elections, who are professional civil servants, are at times treated as adversaries, when in reality and in my experience they're all dedicated to making sure that they can do whatever they can for the voters' vote to be counted and their voice to be heard in every county in Pennsylvania, red and blue alike.
Do you think in Pennsylvania we'll know who won the state on election night?
Yeah, that's sort of the big question. So with any election, even before mail ballot voting, it always really comes down to how close an election is before you know who won and who lost, right? It could be for any office, and it could have been before mail-in ballot voting. So the closer elections are, generally the longer it takes before you know who won and who lost. In the general election in 2022, the race for governor was called before midnight, and I think the race for Senate was called maybe like 2 or 3 a.m. So you did know on election night.
As soon as we walked out the door.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's right.
Do you think that these lawsuits that are pending right now before the Supreme Court will be decided before the election?
It's hard to say, but it is a very time-sensitive environment, and voters have a right to know what the rules are, and our election administrators really need to know um, what the law requires to do their job, well. Um, so I think it's important that we support our counties, that we understand the challenges that they face, and that last minute changes are best avoided when you can.
Getting to what he mentioned about, though we know on election night, if these cases are still hung up in court, we may not know, correct?
Well, what has generally kept, which is generally, I think, led to the perception that Pennsylvania takes longer, is because in other states that use mail ballot voting, red states and blue states, like Florida even, they can begin the process, they can begin processing those mail ballot envelopes days or weeks in advance. So on election day, they're just counting the votes. They're not scrutinizing the declaration envelope to make sure it's signed and dated, and opening the declaration envelope and extracting the secrecy envelope and opening the secrecy envelope and extracting the ballot and flattening the ballot. It's this long assembly line that goes that has to occur to maintain the integrity of that process prior to the vote being counted at all. In Pennsylvania, that process can only begin at 7 a.m., unlike all these other states.
Right.
So Florida may be able to report its mail ballot results by midnight, except for probably the ones that came in that day. But in Pennsylvania, we're only getting started at 7 a.m. And in
That's just counting them, correct?
At 7 a.m.,
On election day?
it's the whole process.
Oh, they have to open them that day as well?
They have to review the outer envelope to make sure it's signed and dated.
I thought they do that now.
No. When ballots come back and the county election officials are like time stamping it or receiving it, and they like notice it's not signed or dated, some counties will reach out to let the voter know.
Okay.
Like I said, you can come in and sign it or you can do whatever. But in Pennsylvania, none of that process, all that process has to take place from 7 a.m. on. Whereas in other states, it's days or weeks in advance. So when you hear about delays in getting results in Pennsylvania, they're really not delays at all. It takes time to count millions of votes, and to do it right and by the book, like our counties do. But it's one reason why Pennsylvania's results seem to lag behind other counties. It's because those other counties got a 3-day or 5-day or 2-week start.
Well, in Lawrence, they do. If they get a mail ballot and there's an error, they do call, correct, Debbie?
Yes.
So, like, we're 2 Republican commissioners, 1 Democrat, which is kind of the theme of a lot of these Western Pennsylvania counties. But, like, right next door in Butler County, they seem to be having lawsuits and issues. In Washington County.
Yeah.
And it's the same government structure, makeup, partisan makeup. Why isn't that happening here?
Yeah, I mean, there have been cases where counties get sued for doing something and counties get sued for not doing that same thing. Act 77, the mail-in ballot law, is still fairly new, and there are issues in it that it's been up to the courts to address. Like, can you not have drop boxes, or can you have as many as you want? Can you allow back curing, or can you not? So
I guess what would be your preference? Because I know there's already a lot of eyeballs on Pennsylvania. If there's not a winner election night, there's going to be obvious questions of, well, why is it taking so long?
Broadly speaking, supportive of anything that maximizes voter accessibility without compromising election integrity. So if a ballot envelope comes back and it's not signed, it doesn't in any way compromise election integrity. to let that voter know that they should get a replacement, or they should come in and sign it, or go to the polls on election day and vote a paper provisional ballot, because the other vote will be voided. So there's never two ballots counted. It doesn't corrupt the integrity of the process at all.
Okay.
Same with drop boxes. They're Board of Elections drop boxes. They're not some party organization or anything else like that. They are being returned directly to the Board of Elections. And especially with the deadline only 7 days before election day, because you could have applied many months ago, but you can apply up to 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that Board of Elections gets that application that day and processes it that day and puts it in the mail, your mail in Lawrence probably goes to the Pittsburgh distribution center and then to the voter. So that can take 2 days. If the voter doesn't leave it on their kitchen table and completes it right away and mails it back, that can take a couple of days. So 7 days is not much time. For a voter to get their ballot on Monday with election day on Tuesday, it's certainly much more convenient for them to return it directly to the Board of Elections than it is to, or it's more reliable to return it to the Board of Elections than to put it back in the mail and hope it's going to get there the next day.
Because it has to be postmarked.
It has to be.
To mail it.
It has to be received by 8 p.m. on election evening. So, with one exception in 2020, postmarks don't matter. So the postmark could be like 2 weeks before election day, and the ballot still won't be counted. There is an exception. Overseas and military ballots, if they're mailed back, they can be received after election day for a number of days, provided they're postmarked on or before election day. So absentees, that's how it had been in the past with overseas and military. But with mail-in ballots, they have to be in the hands of the Board of Elections, returned to the Board of Elections by 8 p.m. So that's one reason why drop boxes are a little bit more helpful. You know, in a city like the size of Philadelphia, getting around. I mean, even though Philadelphia is geographically very small, going to City Hall is not easy. So when you have drop boxes available, especially if the voter can't make it to the polls, because you can also get your mail ballot and go to the polls if you want, and they'll void the mail ballot and you can vote on the voting system there. So you could still do that. But if you can't vote on election day because you're a firefighter working a 12-hour shift, or you're a police officer working a 12-hour shift, or a nurse or a doctor, or you're taking care of your grandkids, or you're working 2 jobs or whatever else, and you can't otherwise in those 13 hours make it to the polls, voting by mail is a very convenient option for voters, and it's been widely embraced throughout the country. And some states have switched to all vote by mail, Republican and Democratic, or Republican leaning and Democratic leaning states. From Washington State to Utah, they're vote by mail states.
I think one word that would probably pop up.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think so. I'm headed to Mercer next.
What does your office, or what can you do, or maybe going around to these counties can help dispel some rumors, but the word fraud is going to be thrown out there. Whether dead people voting, or people voting twice, or voting early and often. I mean, like, what can your office or the governor or the legislator do to dispel?
Well, running elections in Philadelphia, I'm certainly familiar with all of those myths. Dead voting, for example, voting in the place of a dead voter, easiest thing in the world to prove. You have a Department of Health record when the voter died, and you have a record of when the vote was cast. And if the voter died before the vote was cast, and you compare them, you can identify a case where a deceased voter voted. That is, I don't know, maybe in the distant past that had occurred. I don't know. My background is in history, but I don't know, the history of that in voting. But it's not something, in my experience, that occurs except for very, very rarely. And when it does occur, it's caught, because the Department of Health records are sent to each county board of elections. So if the Department of Health record comes in with a record the voter died on July 1st, and they receive a ballot coming in, which is also, it's the same system. You're recording that the ballot is coming in for the voter. You're seeing the voter record, and the voter record's canceled because they're deceased, then it's obviously an easily documented case of voter fraud. But I think, it's important when people have questions and when you hear allegations that you make sure that you research them to the extent that you can. And if there are unanswered questions, or there is evidence of some sort of wrongdoing, then you refer to law enforcement for investigation. In the very rare cases where things like that do occur. But I think it's important to keep it in perspective, the extent to which these things do occur. Because there is an example of it having had occurred does not mean that it's widespread or prevalent. It is in fact very easy to identify and investigate and prosecute.
Are there a lot of records of that, or in the last election?
No. And again, it's the easiest thing in the world to prove.
So where do these pop up from? Is it just strictly partisan?
Well, I mean, there are plenty of things that you hear when it comes to elections that don't necessarily have any basis in fact, at least at the present time. Voting in Pennsylvania has never been more safe and secure, and since primary 2020, there is a voter verifiable paper ballot record of every vote that's cast by every voter in every election, that's used in 2 audits after every election. So the voter, whether they vote by mail, or they vote in person using a hand-marked paper ballot, or on something called a ballot marking device, which still prints ink on paper selections the voter made, there's a record of every single vote that's cast that's used in 2 audits after every election to make sure the tabulated results are accurate.
Are there any statewide?
Yeah, I will in a minute, Ellen. We started ahead of schedule, so.
Are there any statewide mandates or things to be on the lookout for poll workers, just in case something violent could happen, or do's and don'ts precipitated from what happened in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I think misinformation about elections has consequences. It has consequences in confidence in the results, and can unfortunately at times result in as we saw in recent years, threats of violence or intimidation. And we need to make sure that voters and poll workers and election officials are safe and feel safe. The Shapiro administration organized an election threat task force so that if any federal or state or local partner becomes aware of threats of violence or intimidation targeting voters or election officials or poll workers, then that information can be quickly shared and law enforcement can do its job. So our election workers can do their job, which only they can do in a time-sensitive environment. We're just counting our voters' votes. In 2020, that was really new to a lot of us. When threats like that were coming in, you're like, who do I give it to? Do I give it to the police department? Do I give it to the FBI? Do I give it to whatever? So we now have a structure in place. So should that occur, and it's not anticipating it occurring, it's not expecting it to occur, but it would be foolish to ignore the possibility, so that if it does occur, everybody will be prepared for it.
What advice would you give counties as far as beefing up security at the polls on election day this year?
Well,
in
if
particular?
counties are aware of threats of violence or intimidation,
Mm-hmm.
then the counties would certainly make sure that there's a law enforcement presence there. But it's not about like occupying polling places with police or anything like that. it's uncommon when it has occurred, and I'm sure the county will be responsive if there are any threats targeting poll workers, or if there is any intimidation targeting voters. Okay. All right. Well, thank you both.
Thanks for coming in.
Sorry, I was a little bit ahead of
Right,
schedule
no, it
coming
actually
in.
works out better for us.
Okay. Well, if you have any follow-up questions, just let us know. Okay.
Okay, what number? Do you have a number we could reach you at?
Yes, I think Ellen here, who I think you were in contact with.